Black Clock Audio Tales is brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out their Dino Sound Slippers and their Cthulhu Slippers and all their other cool slippers. BunnySlippers.com. Alright, welcome to Black Clock Audio Tales, where we tell you a book one chapter at a time, a collection of short stories, poems, myths, folklore, whatnot. Talk to writers, game designers, all kinds of people, and get to the bottom of some literature stuff. And, I don't know, ultimately help me kind of like get a bigger picture of what led up to like stuff like H.P. Lovecraft and cosmic horror and weird fiction, which I focus on the last Tuesday of each month with People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. And of course, Black Clock Audio Tales is brought to you by donations, by listeners like you. And yeah, the way that you can help out the show is going to threadless.com and going to pgttcm.threadless.com and buying a shirt or a mug or something like that. Or you can always go to paypal.me/pgttcm. And if you don't want to buy something, and you don't want to donate money, review the show, give it 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to say something nice on iTunes, I'd love that. And you know what? Since you're being so cool, I'm going to start the show right now. Me and Ken Hite. All right, so here we are with Ken Hite. Not live in the studio, but hey, Skyping it up. But yeah, no. Yeah, how's life been treating you these days, Ken?
I have received a warning message from Jupiter Pluvius, god of rain, or perhaps whatever god is in charge of roof leaks.
Yes.
So we are crossing our fingers that the gifted roof professionals at Allendorfer Roofing did their jobs.
All right. Good deal.
Because it's supposed to rain tonight. So we'll see.
Cool. Well, I mean, hopefully that works for you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and any
other than that, everything's happy.
Yeah, and this is I'm going to say this is going out probably sometime late August. Any conventions or shows or anything you're doing currently?
Well, I will be at Necronomicon in Providence, so perhaps it will drop while I'm there. If not, maybe it will drop while I'm at DragonCon in Atlanta, and I will see all y'all there. I know one thing that I'm doing at DragonCon. This I should be on Derek's show, not your show, to talk about. But apparently they're doing a screening of Nosferatu, and I am on the panel of Nosferatu experts.
Nice.
So I am very excited about that. So that'll be at DragonCon if you are at DragonCon and think, gosh, I'd like to see a masterpiece of film from 1922 and hear Ken Hite talk about it. And I can do both. Then that's what you should do.
Oh, wow. I should have a special Nosferatu episode so I could get that.
Yeah, that's right. Just do the episode where now, as a group, we're going to watch Nosferatu. So you just have like 2 hours of silence at the end. Wasn't that amazing?
Oh, it's really hard for me not to make comments during movies. MST3K ruined me for movies for the rest of my life because of that.
Note to self: never see a movie with DB.
Yeah. That's why I go hang out in the Esoteric Order of Dagon during the film festival, so that you know. Gwen and Brian don't have to come up and be like, all right, we told you once, get out of here.
Well, cross fingers that we will, all of us, be in our proper places in Portland in October.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, no, that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yep.
H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, if anyone doesn't know what we're talking about.
For those who don't know, the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, Oregon, where E.B. and I get to see each other in person briefly and then never see each other for the rest of the show usually.
Oh yeah.
We see each other like at that first
the meet and greet at Sam's Billiards.
At Sam's Billiards, and then that's it.
Yeah, it's like, oh hey, there's Ken over there. I'm running here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have to change that this year.
Right.
But exactly. Someone who we talk about at the festival that never gets to be there is certainly August Derleth.
Yes. He doesn't get to be there, first of all, because I think people would say mean things about him. And second of all, because he's been dead for, 40 years? So.
40 years or so, yeah.
Yeah. So that two excellent reasons that he's not there.
Yeah, can you give us a rundown on August Derleth, who the guy is or was?
Okay. August Derleth was a writer, first and foremost, and I think people maybe forget that because if he's remembered now, he is mostly remembered as H.P. Lovecraft's, not so much Boswell, but his relentless and tireless promoter. Mm-hmm. He was a youthful fan of Lovecraft, started writing him, I believe, at age 16, and fell madly in love with Lovecraft's writing, just as many of us did around that same time in our lives, mm-hmm. and was in a position to do something about it. He basically sort of became one of the people that wound up with the nebulously defined rights to reprint Lovecraft after Lovecraft's passing, uh-huh. and following a feud with Robert Barlow, the actual literary executor of Lovecraft's estate. He and Donald Wandre founded a small publishing house called Arkham House, and Arkham House is still around. It's still a leading small press in horror. It has had its ups and downs, as we all have. But there is a very excellent argument. It's an argument that I would make and be sympathetic to, that without August Derleth, we would not know H.P. Lovecraft the way that we do now. We would not have him. You would not have a podcast about him. We would not be going to a film festival about him. There would not be a convention about him every 2 years in his hometown without Derleth basically having built that groundwork and leveled that playing field for all the Lovecraftian stuff to get built on later on. And my evidence is, hey, how many William Hope Hodgson conventions are there?
How many M.R. James film conventions have you gone to lately?
Exactly right. And there are many, and there are actually better M.R. James films than there are Lovecraft films. Yeah. So that's a strong argument right there. They're not Blackwood Days is not closing things down in Canada every 2 years. Yeah, I mean, we don't have Arthur Mackinfest. Maybe we do have Arthur Mackinfest in Wales because the Welsh are a party people, but they don't tell us about it, that's for sure, whereas Lovecraft fans are global and loud and getting globaler and louder. And that is basically down to Derleth saying, I'm going to make sure that this person, this seminal figure in the history of the weird fiction in not just America, but in the world, is not forgotten, that his work remains in print, that it remains in print in a good editions, as good as I can make them, which, better or worse, and that the tradition of the weird that he was such a exponent of, that I will continue to publish other authors in, because of course he also published Clark Ashton Smith, he published Robert E. Howard, he published all manner of writers up and down the scale, not just people who knew or collaborated with Lovecraft, but those who were later influenced by him. For example, August Derleth discovered Ramsey Campbell and nurtured him as an author, and basically pulled him out of infantile Lovecraft pastiche into becoming Ramsey Campbell. And if you've read, say, the letters between Campbell and Derleth, it's an amazing moment to see Derleth realizing he was never going to get to be Ramsey Campbell. He was never going to have the talent at horror that Lovecraft had, or that Ramsey Campbell had, but he could recognize it in Campbell, and he instantly decided, I'm going to pass the mantle on to this British kid, this little British snot-nosed punk who is just as annoying to me as I must have been to Howard Lovecraft. And the way that Lovecraft was always very generous to Derleth and worked with him and gave him good advice, some of which Derleth took. And he immediately turns. And so we not only have Derleth to thank for Lovecraft, we also absolutely have him to thank for Ramsey Campbell, because without that, Ramsey Campbell would have gone on to be a music journalist or something.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy stuff. That's pretty crazy stuff.
And so Derleth, like I say, was 16 when he discovered Lovecraft. He was born in 1909, so he was like a generation younger than Lovecraft, died in 1971. So almost 50 years now that he's not been with us. But as I say, Arkham House is still with us, and it is still every now and again banging one out really, really well. And also, Derleth pioneered the publication of Lovecraft's letters, making sure that people who wanted to condescend to August Derleth would have lots and lots of ammunition with which to do it. And there's not a lot of people who would have done that, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's August Derleth in a nutshell. And of course, he would have probably wanted also someone, maybe me, to say he was also very recognized as a regional author. He wrote novels, straight up normal naturalistic literary novels in regional fiction, as it was called. So they're about the Midwest and about life and nature in the Midwest and the interplay of family and the countryside. And no one reads them now because no one reads anyone's regional fiction, with the bare exception of Faulkner.
Sure.
But that, I think, is what he thought his real calling was to write the Sac Prairie Saga, which is what he called his series of linked novels set in that area of Wisconsin. And that the Lovecraft thing was just a sideline. It was just a thing he did. But he did it for another person's memory and for the cause of weird fiction. So
it seems like almost like if Laura Ingalls Wilder all of a sudden started writing horror fiction.
It's not unlike that. Although Derleth, I think, is more of a civilization guy and less of a pioneer guy.
Sure, yes.
His writing is very much families and their interrelationship over the century, as opposed to, oh my gosh, the prairies are horrible. I mean, Laura Ingalls Wilder is only a couple of steps off from a horror novel anyway, every now and again, when she is setting up the thing over which she cheerily triumphs. The life on the prairie does not seem, pretty great to me.
Yeah. A couple years back, I lived not too far away from those big books were written, and people would tell me about it, expecting me to be a fan of the television show. And it's yeah, I saw a little bit because I had a babysitter who made us watch it, but that's about it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I know who Michael Landon was, and that's about it.
Yeah. I mean, Laura Ingalls Wilder, though, she's certainly going to outlive Derleth, and I think that she is one of the few exponents of regional fiction, since you bring her up, who is going to stick around for another 100 years and didn't need August Derleth to do it for her. So
sure, yeah.
Whereas if it weren't for Lovecraft, I don't know that anyone would be reading even his best novels now, because it's just completely out of the mainstream, and it's not written to appeal to young people the way that Laura Ingalls Wilder is.
No, and it feels like Derleth, by resurrecting or not keeping Lovecraft from becoming buried, so to say, that also kept other writers and intermingling other writers into the Cthulhu mythos, like Chambers and Bierce.
Right.
Keeping other people alive, not necessarily that Bierce necessarily needed Derleth, but
yeah.
Chambers.
Pierce was going to be all right one way or the other. Chambers, I think, was headed for Oliver Onion's country, where every so often someone would reprint The Yellow Sign and people would go, that was a good story, and then move on with their lives. Yeah. But because, again, to an extent, Derleth, and also I think Lynn Carter has something to take the blame for there, there's been a degree of attention that is still paid to Chambers that might not have happened. Although, again, Chambers had a reluctant sponsor in E.F. Blyler, who was the commissioning editor for Dover Books. And Blyler probably was getting his list from Derleth in a sense, in that he read, the catalogs of Arkham House. But there wasn't, I think, a straight-up Arkham House version of Chambers, because there kind of didn't need to be. He was still in print in the 30s. His memorial edition comes out in, I think, 37. And then he's reprinted again in 1965 by Ace, which is possibly a part of the sort of churn up of Lovecraft in the early 60s that is mostly happening overseas, but a little bit is happening in America, and with Derleth, and then with Lynn Carter at the tail end of the 60s in Ballantine. A history of horror editing. That's what you've tuned in for, people.
Yeah, no. I find this stuff fascinating, and I forget other people don't. But
well, I'm sure someone does.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
if you're listening to this podcast, some of this is going to be interesting to you. This is the equivalent of making you read a work of regional fiction. Like, get to the Lovecraft! Derleth also sedulously aped Arthur Conan Doyle, writing a bunch of Sherlock Holmes pastiches, the Solar Ponds stories, which, for my sins, I have read because I was just as big a Holmesian as a youth as I was Lovecraftian. Sure. Let's say this, and we're going to get to it eventually, I'm sure, but I would say you can separate Derleth's Lovecraft work into two sets, the sort of posthumous collaborations, giant air quotes, and the independently Derlethy fiction. The Solar Ponds is kind of between those in my mind in terms of quality. I don't remember them really rocking my world in the way that even the Adrian Conan Doyle ones, and certainly not the way that John Dixon Carr or Vincent Sterrett or any of the really great Holmesian pasticheurs managed to do. Or Lauren Esselman, in fact, who did an amazing job with the Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula one. But Derleth's notion of not writing fake Sherlock Holmes ones, but coming up with his own detective who's sort of a weird caricature of Sherlock Holmes, who is already a weird character. I think that Solar Ponds doesn't work as well as maybe one would like. So that's the other thing that he might be they'd be known for, because Holmesians, I think, would keep Solar Ponds around, if not warm in their hearts.
Huh. Yeah, I'm really glad that you and Scott Connors and some of these other folks out there who edit things and write things go on these deep dives for writers that not everyone has access to, but because of your special granted access of who you are or whatever research you're doing, or
yes, I have special powers. Thanks to my credentials, I can order books online. Other people have to wait for them to be delivered to them, but I can go to an online site and get books, unlike everyone else in the world.
I'm talking about that special power called patience to sit through an August Derleth story.
Oh, right.
That other people would be like,
that's a different power.
Okay, all right.
Well, that's just because I don't know. I ate a lot of sugared cereals and watched a lot of cartoons when I was a kid. I have no idea. Yeah. I should be just as big a wreck as everyone else.
I'll try and start one, and I'm like, oh, man, this is worse than trying to find something on Netflix. I'll end up spending like half an hour doing.
Yeah, the Solar Pond stories aren't bad per se, and they're short, but they're not great. And if you are not, just a desperate completist, there's no reason to open them, as far as I'm concerned. But we are here talking about the desperate completist and Lovecraft and August Derleth, I guess.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
If you are interested in deep dives into August Derleth and Derleth's publishing, I am a big fan of a book by John D. Hafele called A Look Behind the Derleth Mythos.
Okay.
And I think he is working, or maybe he's finished, I don't know, on a complete biography of Derleth. But the Look Behind the Derleth Mythos sort of is a revisionist take on the sort of standard knock on Derleth, that he was a talentless hack who just rode Lovecraft's coattails to fame.
Yeah.
Right? And when you read Hafele's book, you recognize that that's not really the case. That Derleth, as we've talked about, had a real literary reputation. He did not need H.P. Lovecraft. He did not, and certainly anyone who's ever run a small press knows, there are much better ways to lose money.
Yeah.
And so he did not need to be keeping Lovecraft in print. This was not a thing he was doing as a way to get fame. It was not a thing he was doing as a way to get credibility. It's certainly not a thing that he was doing as a way to get money.
Yeah.
What he was doing it for, and you can argue whether or not this was a good idea, is to keep Lovecraft's name out there. And Derleth figured out that Lovecraft and Weird Tales, the magazine, kind of needed each other, which Dorothy McElraith, the editor after Farnsworth Wright, discovered and began publishing. And that's why Charles Dexter Ward gets published in 1940, I believe, or 44. When Lovecraft is dead, Derleth sends them the typescript. takes all of the early Lovecraft and he submits it to Weird Tales. Weird Tales prints it. The Lovecraft that was in fanzines and places that we wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Yeah.
And so every time Weird Tales would print a Lovecraft story, Weird Tales would do well, and also Lovecraft would do well. His name would get out there more. Mm-hmm. And it was a symbiosis, and at some point, Weird Tales would be, we don't have any Lovecraft. Do you have anything? You could maybe find a laundry list or a, and Derleth had the Commonplace book, and he had sort of some scraps of beginnings of things, the Rose Window bit that eventually became Lurk at the Threshold, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so basically as a way to keep Lovecraft's name alive and a way to keep Weird Tales alive, he would write the posthumous collaborations. And you can certainly make the argument, and I think I would, and I think even Hayfela would, mm-hmm. that they still should have been by Lovecraft and Derleth.
Yeah.
Or something like that, that he should not have passed them off, should not be forced to pretend or mistakenly believe, as I did as a child, that The Shunned Room is a Lovecraft story, because it's not. But it's a Derleth story from a fragment of a Lovecraftian Commonplace book entry. But Derleth was basically doing this in his non-existent free time while being a real writer and trying to publish other things, mm-hmm. basically to keep Weird Tales going. And the way you can tell he isn't doing it for any of the ego, money, whatever reasons is he did very few of them. And he did them at very specific times when Weird Tales was kind of up against the ropes. And you can just look at his correspondence. You can look at Weird Tales' correspondence, do the deep dive that Hayfela did. He is the first person, by the way, to do this research. Everyone from Joshi on down who has been blackguarding Derleth mm-hmm. has done it with zero evidence. They've just said, well, this is a terrible story. It shouldn't say H.P. Lovecraft on it. I'm mad. Derleth's fault.
Yeah.
All of those are true things. It is a terrible story. It shouldn't just say H.P. Lovecraft on it. You are mad, and it was Derleth's fault. But do the reading. Find out why. And the evidence, again, is that when Derleth is writing Trail of Cthulhu, when he's writing Mask of Cthulhu, when he's writing The Thing That Walked in the Wind, when he's writing all of his Astor Mythos cycle, mm-hmm. he's doing that as August Derleth.
Yeah.
If he wanted, again, he could have put Lovecraft's name on those. But he's making a differentiation between the ones that he is trying very hard to write as he imagines Lovecraft would have completed them had he lived longer, mm-hmm. and the ones that Derleth is writing as Derleth. But, of course, since the Derleth ones are better than the posthumous collaborations, it would have been easier, I think, for him, if he were a scumbag, to have just released Trail of Cthulhu as a lost novel of H.P. Lovecraft. No one could have said boo to him about it, because he had all the letters.
Yeah.
He had all the evidence. But instead what he does is he meticulously tries to present the collected letters in as much detail about the writing as he can. And again, you read the new Joshi and Schultz edited ones, and they're much more compendious, and there's letters that they found, and there's letters that Arkham House didn't publish or excerpted. Mm-hmm. But the things they excerpted are not things about Lovecraft's writing. They're things about Lovecraft being mad at his neighbors, or Lovecraft being excited about a sunrise or something else, or just talking about his day.
Yeah.
Which, if you've read one Lovecraft letter, you've kind of read all of them in that tenor. And so he's not covering anything up with the selected letters. He's not trying to sort of cuckoo in on Lovecraft when he writes these posthumous collaborations. They're being written as ways to keep Lovecraft's name alive when Derleth is worried that Lovecraft will die without more publications, die as an author, and then also to keep Weird Tales alive, because if Weird Tales can put by H.P. Lovecraft on the cover, it will sell more copies and do better and stay in existence, and thus be able to keep Lovecraft and the weird tradition in America alive. So you can certainly have any number of cavils, first and foremost that the stories are terrible, but I don't think can say Derleth is doing it out of some sort of base motivation.
Yeah.
And that, I think, what a lot of people just assume is, well, he's a hack and he's just sort of clinging to Lovecraft's coattails trying to get attention. That was not a way to get attention in 1948.
No.
That was the opposite of a way to get attention. And in the 50s, when he was writing these stories, he's writing these sort of Cthulhu Mythos stories either because he desperately needs to fill a catalog spot in Arkham House, or because Weird Tales is still clinging to life and saying, anything that says Cthulhu now. We can take anything that says Cthulhu. We've done the hard Lovecraft work. Now just the word Cthulhu will sell. And so he writes into that market. And sure, Trail of Cthulhu and Mask of Cthulhu are not great collections. Trail of Cthulhu is kind of Sax Romery feel to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that trying to pastiche Sax Romer instead of Lovecraft actually sort of liberates him a little bit, in the same way that when Lovecraft was trying to pastiche Dunsany, it liberated him because it was so against his natural tenor of writing. And so I think that that's why Trail of Cthulhu works as well as it does. But again, these are not the Sac Prairie Saga. These are not timeless works of deeply realized psychological fiction, mm-hmm. which Derleth is totally capable of writing. These are things that he's doing basically as a desperate attempt to keep Weird Tales in existence, and as an attempt to fill a catalog spot so that Arkham House doesn't go under. And those are understandable motives, I think. It's not resentment, it's not ego, it's not any of those other things. It's just love of Lovecraft and desperately trying to not live long enough to see no one care about H.P. Lovecraft. And instead the opposite happened, and it's all down to his literally thankless hard work, given that everyone from me on down just bullies him about it now. Once you learn a second thing about something, it adds a dimension. It deepens it. No one's a cartoon in real life.
Sure.
I mean, Himmler is pretty close to a cartoon, quite frankly, because he just gets more pathetic and hilarious the more you learn about him. But most people, they're doing things for what seem like rational motives. And once you learn about it, you know, it changes the story a little bit. And again, this is not to say retroactively I've decided the Dark Brotherhood is a good story. No, It's a terrible story. And a ridiculously terrible story to boot. But I get why he wrote it.
Sure, yeah. Just a reminder, People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, partially sponsored by pgttcm.threadless.com. Get a cool shirt, help the show going, donate some money to paypal.me/pgttcm. Keep the show going, keep the lights on. Thank you so much. Here's more of me and Ken right now. It's fun, interesting stuff about August Derleth, for sure.
I mean, and you can certainly argue that his interpretation of Lovecraft or of the Cthulhu Mythos as a Manichaean struggle between good and evil. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The famous black magic quote that, again, Derleth thought was real. He did not forge it. He was just sloppy in his research and had other things to do and did not. Again, it spent people who actually cared. Those people took decades to figure out where that quote came from. And again, they were only able to find out because Derleth kept all the records. Huh. So the black magic quote, which Derleth, found and didn't check, into Derleth's Catholicism and Derleth's notion of how moral structure for stories ought to work. Mm-hmm. And yes, he had a reductionist view of the mythos as a result. But again, this is true of everyone's view of the mythos. I mean, Joshi is trying to read Dunwich Horror out of the mythos, right? He's like, that's a bad story.
Yeah.
That's not real Lovecraft. Good and evil have a fight and good wins. That's not Lovecraft. It's like, it says Lovecraft right on it, and it's a masterpiece. We all know this.
Sure.
So, this is not unique to August Derleth, that you find some author that you love and you read either things that resonate with you into that author, or you say the thing that resonates with me by definition must be the most important thing. People do this with Shakespeare. People do this with Tolstoy. They do it with everybody. You see an author, that you love, and you're like, well, obviously everything that he's writing is about the things that he's saying to me, because this is our connection. That's just a human response to literature. And Derleth's response to Lovecraft is literally no different from any other alpha Lovecraftian's response to Lovecraft. I mean, I say Lovecraft is all about the weird, messy details of history and the building this seamless web of hoaxing and counterfeit. That's the great gift of Lovecraft. Other people are like, no, Ken, you're wrong. But that's the thing that appeals to me. That's what got me in. So I elevate that. I just try not to say, stories that he doesn't do that in aren't by Lovecraft or aren't really good or whatever.
Yeah.
I try to sort of maintain a broader view, because I think that makes you a better student of the topic.
Yeah.
And again, while in the world of while we're blaming Derleth for things, he did, for example, write a very nasty letter to C. Hall Thompson, the author of Spawn of the Green Abyss, and say, you can't use Lovecraft. We own Lovecraft. And that probably wasn't even true then, given that Lovecraft in his lifetime let anybody use the mythos, including August Derleth, cough, cough. And so you can say, well, that was a little dog in the mangery of him to try and keep C. Hall Thompson. But the thing is, he didn't know that Lovecraft's mythos was strong enough to survive without gardening. And again, you can argue, well, if he was so worried, he shouldn't have written terrible Lovecraft collaborations. A legitimate argument. But, and so that's a little bit edgy, that's a little bit dodgy, but you can sort of see it as panic that what if Lovecraft porn happens? What if something that we don't like? What if something that brings the great man into disrepute occurs? Then we're in trouble. Then we have a bad situation. Then we have the same thing that happened to Poe for a century, where everyone said Poe was an alcoholic. Because Griswold was his executor and spread that canard. So he's just worried very much about Lovecraft's sort of literary standing, and he doesn't want to sort of just let any Tom, Dick, and Harry in there. And again, when you look at the people that Lovecraft collaborated with in the revision mythos, it's hard to argue that that's wrong. Would we be perfectly, happy and better off if there had never been any William Lumley mythos stories, or even Dwayne Rymel, or Hazel Heald? Zelia Bishop, I'm gonna give a pass to, but most of the rest of these people, they did not bring anything really great into the mythos, and the mythos would be stronger, you can argue, without them. I don't think that that's Derleth's call to make then or now, but I don't think that it's anyone else's call to make then or now. So
I think the only person whose call it is to make is the editor who's compiling stories for collected volumes.
Exactly. Right, yeah. It's Ross Lockhart's call to make.
Yeah. And the reader to be like, I don't want to read a Rand to Goth story.
I don't like that. I'm going to flip through Netflix for half an hour instead. The thing that I think people then forget in all the hoopla is that some of his stories are actually really kind of good. I look at his Ithaqua stories, for example. Ithaqua and the Thing That Walked on the Wind specifically, as being really strong and not suffering nearly to the extent that the sort of collaborations or even the Trail of Cthulhu novel does from the sort of Derleth dump that a lot of the other stories do have, where he just is in such a hurry to put all the gods and books in that he winds up just choking the story to death.
Yeah.
Lovecraft was not immune to the Derleth dump. I mean, read The Whisper in Darkness. And if it's your third time reading through it, tell me with a straight face you're not sort of skipping past the part where Akeley is talking to Wilmarth about the immemorial secrets of the Tao and the Black Nebulae and the rest of that.
That's the stuff that I go over and be like, okay, now that's a reference to this, and all right, where's my Dan Harms book at? Okay, all right.
Exactly. Now you're reading it like an annotator or a game designer, not like a consumer of horror fiction. But I mean, so much of the rest of Whisperer works, the sort of the UFO quality of it and all the rest of it. And then there's that Derleth dump right in the middle. And so you can't say, August Derleth, how dare you do what H.P. Lovecraft did in one of his greatest stories? It's just, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And I think in Thing That Walked on the Wind, in Ithaqua, in a couple of the other sort of standalone Derleth stories, they do work. They work better than even other Cthulhu Mythos authors, and in some cases, better than some, I want to say, of some of the Cthulhu stuff that Lovecraft did. And he did, he gave us the Cho-Cho people.
Yeah.
That's not nothing.
Yeah.
We would all be a poor role-playing game designer without Cho-Cho people.
What other creations do we owe to August Derleth besides the Cho-Cho and Ithaqua? Is Ithaqua a...
Ithaqua his, yes.
Okay.
The Wendigo is a pre-existing thing. That's a myth or legend of basically the Ojibwa or the Cree Algonquin culture complex. But he Lovecraftifies it via Blackwood again.
Yeah.
But Cthulhu, for example, he famously was like, well, we've got a water one, that's Cthulhu. We've got an earth one, that's Shub-Niggurath. I've just made up an air one. Now I need a fire one, so that'll be Cthulhu. And again, did we need a fire elemental? I don't know. Has there been any particularly great Cthulhu fiction? Maybe not, but we got him now. That's fun. Oh, and yeah. bits of Cthulhu can work, I think. The notion that Derleth got Hastur, quote unquote, wrong. You know, Hastur was a god of shepherds and a name that Lovecraft dropped. He wasn't anything before Derleth decided he's Cthulhu's half-brother and he's a slug and he lives in a lake orbiting Aldebaran and all the rest of that stuff. That's all fun stuff. That's great. And we're all like snotty and we say, no, Hastur is the elemental spirit of decay. He's despair. He's entropy. That's just John Tynes having a better idea for Hastur. That's not what Hastur, quote unquote, was. That's just the way that Tynes responded to Chambers and to that word, really. But you can't say Return of Hastur is retroactively read out of the faith. So if you like the fact that you can't say Hastur's name 3 times, that's Derleth right there. He's the guy that we have to thank for the Byaki.
Oh, okay.
Right? So if you are using the Byaki, you're using Derleth. And by the way, they are not in public domain, so get your heart right. There's a flying monster in Robert E. Howard that is summoned by a sorcerer, but is never called a Byaki. Lovecraft has the weird duck things in the festival, from which the description of the Byaki that you see in Call of Cthulhu is taken for no reason. And then Derleth sort of combines them into the Byaki that we know and love in Trail of Cthulhu. So that's Derleth doing that. And the Byaki are actually kind of a cool concept, this notion of sort of these space bats that come down and get summoned by wizards and fly you to mysterious Lovecrafty places. It solves the problem of interplanetary travel, which you need for sort of this cosmic interplanetary quality to your fiction in some cases. And the Byaki are certainly as good as the light envelopes of Yadith that Lovecraft uses in Through the Gates of the Silver Key. Yeah. So what's your favorite Derleth? I mean, I'm going on and on endlessly. Or just probably one of those people who sits at the side of the road and throws onions at it.
When it comes to Derleth, I have to say probably like people are like, really? You like Lurker at the Threshold? I think that's the one that I'm thinking of. The one that has like the old mill. Yeah. It's like kind of it's like definitely a ripoff of like the Dunwich Horror meets Shadow over Innsmouth, and it's
I remember liking that when I read it. And it does contain more Lovecraft per pound than the other quote unquote collaborations, but that's still only like, what would it be? Maybe 6% Lovecraft at top. Yeah. So it works. It's at novel length, so Derleth doesn't need to sort of like jam everything in the way that he does with the shorter stories. And the central concept that he borrowed from Lovecraft with the window in the tower. That's a really great, strong concept, and I enjoy it. And it's fun to see, an Indian character, a Native American character in the novels, even if he's kind of a dodgy bad guy sort of a guy. But Lovecraft mentions the Indians, but he never personalizes them, whereas Derleth at least personalizes Misquamacus. And then Misquamacus goes on to give us the bad guy in Graham Masterton's immortal The Manitou.
Yeah, we covered it a couple years back on the podcast. And Sarah was like, the difference between Lovecraft and Derleth is Derleth gives women names.
Yes, because Derleth, liked ladies. He also liked boys. I mean, he was actually, I believe, bisexual according to the current evidence. But he believed that sex was part of life and therefore part of literature, a thing that Lovecraft did not ever really believe, I think.
Yeah.
So, again, is August Derleth going to be anyone's model of a woke author? I don't think so. But he's writing from a place where human concerns matter, which when he puts human beings into his stories, which he does every now and again, then that works better, I think. I'm a big fan of Something in Wood, the sort of weird little that's just got a fun effect to it. It doesn't really have a lot again, not so much the Derleth dump as just sort of a weird thing that happens that we can blame on the mythos.
Sure. Yeah. I feel like something that you touched on earlier is like a lot of us read Derleth when we were younger and we thought it was Lovecraft, and it's like generally around the time that a lot of us are like reading a lot of different horror novels. And I remember reading a lot of what I thought was Lovecraft when I was also reading like Stephen King and like classic horror novels here and there and science fiction and whatnot. And I don't know, it's there is something about Derleth. It's not Lovecraft, but it has kind of this like quality of like Lovecraft plus or Lovecraft like an off-brand that it's like I do like it. I do like it. No one else likes it, and good for me because I get it all now. And
right, it's very much the methadone, right? You know, you can't get the straight heroin, so you go down to the Derleth clinic and he'll hook you up.
Yeah, or it's the dusty box of Hydrox on the shelf at the corner store. Yeah. It's like, oh man, all the Oreos are gone. Well, these Hydrox, you can keep them. I was like, all right, these are really good.
It's still chocolate cookies.
Yep.
With the cream in it. Yeah. That I think the sort of the pleasures of reading pastiche are part of why any of us stayed in this. Because if you didn't like reading pastiches, certainly if you're our generation, or my generation, maybe not you, but that was all there was for a long old time, was just endless reams of bad Lynn Carter.
Oh yeah.
And if you think Derleth is a bad writer of Lovecraftian pastiche, oh my God, Lynn Carter, it's like the quality of the editing goes up and the quality of the pastiching goes down. There's like a Robert Price, and who I love and adore as an editor, he's like, I'm going to see if I can do a worse job than Lynn Carter at writing. That's my goal.
Oh man,
and it's like, well, mission accomplished, my friend. So I don't know who the next great Lovecraft editor after Price is, but I think Ross Lockhart knows better than to try writing pastiches, and so he's breaking the chain. But another Lovecraft story, one of the Lovecraft collaborations that I actually remember really liking, and I just looked at a list of them to remind myself, The Lamp of Alhazred. Do you remember that one?
Oh,
it's just about how sad August Derleth was when Lovecraft died.
Oh, yeah.
And it's about Ward Phillips, and he has this Lamp of Alhazred, and he puts it out, and he goes to sleep, and that's sort of all that happens in the story.
Yeah.
But it's really just about being sad Lovecraft is dead. And I thought that story really worked.
Sure.
It's not a scary story. It's barely a narrative.
Yeah.
But it's a prose poem, I guess you would say, in the same sort of way that Nyarlathotep or some of the other Lovecraft prose poems are. And it has that effect. And it carries that sensation of loss to the reader as clearly as any Lovecraft story has ever carried fear or terror or cosmic devastation. Don't you think?
Yeah. Lovecraft's poems that Derleth, like, he must have just grabbed like old notebooks or old letters, whatever, and it's like, well, okay, this is this many words. This will fit here, and it's like it's not great, but it fits. And I feel like that's kind of like Derleth kind of used Lovecraft as a tool of like, well, it doesn't necessarily fit, but it works.
Yeah, he definitely made good work of good work is maybe strong, but made furniture out of the commonplace book, used the notes in the poetry, as you say, and was a pretty dab hand at putting together anthologies back in the day. I mean, his collection of his Lovecraft books would not have been my Lovecraft books, but I have the advantage of 100 years of hindsight saying, yeah, you don't need to print that. We never need to read Celophaeus. That's just not a good story. Just leave that out. Or The Outsider, which Derleth loved for reasons. A lot of people love The Outsider for some dumb reason, but as far as I'm concerned, don't make that the title. Don't The Outsider and Others. Good Lord, no. Call it The Color Out of Space, and also, if you must, The Outsider. Something like that. But he puts together especially after Lovecraft, he's got a really good, his talent spotting was finding out who Lovecraft wrote to and asking, do you have fiction, but he publishes Fritz Leiber, for example.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he publishes, we talked about Ramsey Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
He published, I believe, C.L. Moore. That may have been her first time in hardcovers. Lots of good stuff. So he had an eye also, in addition to having Lovecraft's letters, as you say, to dig through.
Yeah, no, definitely. A lot of great stuff he produced in like the first 10 years at Arkham House. One thing that we're covering right now, by the time this comes out, we will be going over Camilla. So we've got that vampire.
Carmilla.
Yeah.
There's an R in it.
Oh, what did I say? Camilla?
Yeah. That's the lady from Carcosa. Thinking of a different lady.
Yeah. So Carmilla, the vampire.
Right. Yeah.
Covering her right now, and we've got some people on the show talking about Carmilla right now, so that's pretty cool. But yeah,
that's a great novel. Again, Carmilla was going to live with or without Derleth, but he published Le Fanu in 1945 in hardcover that no one was doing. Right? I mean, much of what we know about horror, you and me, a lot of that is because Derleth did all the hard work of publishing small press hardback editions of these authors. Le Fanu would have been rediscovered, absolutely. He was never really lost, but Lovecraft couldn't find him when he was looking for him. He had to go dig around and borrow books from friends. The fact that H.P. Lovecraft has to fake his understanding of some of these authors because he can't find the books when he's writing supernatural horror literature, Derleth does a solid, and he takes all of these great authors and he says, "Hey, Robert Bloch, start writing for us." And he puts William Hope Hodgson, of course, into hardbacks, which Hodgson had been almost completely forgotten. And again, if it hadn't been for Lovecraft mentioning Hodgson and then Derleth going through supernatural horror and publishing everything mentioned in it that he could, we might not remember William Hope Hodgson now. But yeah, he published a lot of great people that we would not necessarily know who they were.
Yeah,
and in addition to editing some really good collections just to keep, the sort of, individual tales. Things like, what do I want to say, is it the Dark Brotherhood that's the really good anthology? There's one of them that's really, really good. It's an all-time classic horror anthology.
Yeah, I think the Dark Brotherhood is like the good anthology, but the bad story.
Right, yeah.
Derleth had a knack for that. It's like, all right, I'm going to make this great anthology. I'm going to title it after the worst story in it.
Yep.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for coming on and talking August Derleth with us. That was quite the education, I have to say. I feel like we all get like a credit for that.
Oh. No, I mean, I everything that I learned from Derleth or learned about Derleth, I really learned from John Hafley's book, and I absolutely recommend anyone who cares about August Derleth or just about historical accuracy when they run their mouth, which I guess is nobody now, but to check that book out. It's super affordable on Kindle. I have a lovely hardback of it that I don't regret buying at all.
Cool. Very cool.
I think it's in a second edition now. I have the earlier one that came out first. And it was a wild ride watching him and Joshi go after it in the pages of various blogs when it was being written. So I think I sort of it was on my radar even as he was putting it together. And then I read it. It's an amazing piece of research. And again, the notion that it took 50 years for someone to actually go and look in the file folders and say, "Oh, this is what he was doing."
Yeah,
it seems ridiculous, but that's the way history works.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Ken, and I guess we'll see you next time to talk about Ran to Goth in like literally
can't wait
2 seconds. And thanks again to Ken Hite for coming and being on the show. Hey Ken, thanks again. And probably these are out of order, and you already heard Ken Hite talk about Ran to Goth on People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos. Thank you again for listening to Black Clock Audio Tales, and check out People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos every last Tuesday of the month. And next month is going to be all Bronte, and some Athagwa, and some Andrew Grace, and some Ken Hite. Definitely some Dave's Corner of the Universe. And all the things you know and love. Caravan with a drum solo? You got it. All right. Remember to subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Give us 5 stars. Please give us some ratings on social media. Oh my goodness, do we need it. Everyone who's ever had an vendetta against me uses the ratings, so I've got a 3.5 right now because I told some werewolf kid in Southern California or something like that I didn't want to have him on my show or something. I don't remember what the details were. Anyway, Threadless, yes, pgttcm.threadless.com for all the cool new t-shirts, paypal.me/pgttcm, donate some money to keep the lights on, keep the show going, and keep me being able to brew stuff to lure people into my basement, to stick a microphone in their face and have them talk to me about stuff you want to hear. Hey, why don't you message me and tell me the kind of stuff you want to hear so that we both have a better idea of what's going on. All right. I love you all. Remember, stay squiggly and keep it weird. All right. That's it.